Good morning, everyone. Are we warmed up from being outside in the cold? I'm absolutely over how cold it has been the last little bit, like over it. And I've been in Edmonton my whole life, and I'm such a big champion of Edmonton, but this cold, I don't know, this year it's just been extra taxing. So I'm so honored to be here with you this morning, to have this opportunity to share my knowledge with you. Sometimes I question the title of expert, but I will accept the fact that I have been working in the diversity and inclusion space for almost 15 years and really thinking about a lot of these issues, not only from a personal perspective and what some of the barriers are that I have faced within my career, but also how candidates and job seekers can actually find employment, and also what are, and where I spend probably most of my time, what are the challenges that organizations really need to pay attention to remove those barriers that we continue to see coming through research that's done. Because I have been doing this work for quite a while, these barriers continue to persist, and we know that there are issues. And so the challenge that I hope that I can really help organizations with is actually removing those barriers and really understanding how they can create more inclusive workspaces. So for me, that is the end goal. How can we really look at creating inclusive spaces? And there's some real challenges in our world today, and the biggest one I see is connecting across differences, and how can we relate to others who are different than us. I sort of use the language now of perceived differences, because I think we perceive that we are quite different than others, but if we really spent the time to connect with one another, we are human after all, and there are certainly many elements of our lived experience that we probably could connect on to start to bridge those gaps and understand how can I use my power to help support someone else, be an ally to them, and help them, in this case, with their career progression. So I've been tasked with talking about crafting inclusive job descriptions, and I'm going to lead you through some external considerations that I think are important for us to understand, some strategies that we can really start to think about if you sit in the employer space. What are some of the continued challenges that are there? And then as job seekers, what are some of the things that you can start to think about too as you look to what organizations, that was a great question this morning, like how do I really assess if an organization is diverse and inclusive? Because we've had, I will say, in the last 4 to 5 years, a movement of making things very shiny on the outside. We can change things on our website, we can change things in how they look, but is that really the full experience of someone who comes into an organization? And that's not necessarily the only checkpoint. So why does inclusion matter? Why do I spend my time really focusing in on this space? The research has been there, the business case has been there. There has been progression because I don't have to necessarily convince everyone of the business case. When I first started doing this work, it very much was around, no, there are actual barriers in the workplace. I was focused really on barriers for women. And if we're actually going to achieve equity and get to a place of better innovation and creativity, we have to understand where those gaps are. We'll explore some strategies, like I said, to attract and advance women inside of organizations. I think there's some key factors we can take away to really understand what's within our control to help advance within our careers. Certainly there's organizational benefits, like I said, through the business case that really help us to understand how organizations can do better. I will say do better is defined for me through both, yes, we can talk about it from a revenue or a profit perspective, but also talking about it from a social perspective, and how are we giving back to the communities in which we operate in? How are we thinking about the planet and people, not just through profits? And we'll also spend some time, you know what I just realized? I haven't switched the slides. Whew. Is this the right clicker? There we go. Okay, amazing. So that's what I was just talking through. Okay, here's our agenda. Listen, this is the reality. Like, I am the most pragmatic person, and I will tell it like it is. I had a sick child yesterday who woke up this morning and was also sick, right? And so that was just the reality of my day, making sure they had what they need as I came here to present. And that's part of the strategy too. We need everyone talking about those challenges in the workplace, not just women bringing those forward to say, I have to leave at 4 o'clock to go pick up my kids. I came in later than I was supposed to because I had those challenges in the morning. Like, those are some of the other strategies I think can really help us dispel the reality of what it means to be an individual, a parent, a caregiver, whatever those elements are of your lived experience. Like, that's our reality, and we sometimes talk too much or focus too much on like the system of the workplace. We also need to talk about the system of society, right? If we're going to make a better society, we need to really be thinking about those elements. Like, for many people, there are some type of caregiving element within their life that's going to impact their day. We're not going to have the exact carbon copy day in and day out. So anyways, love talking about this, so certainly happy to chat more on that component. So set a bit of context, talk about some of the common challenges, some key strategies that you can take with you, and then talk about creating change on that personal level. Because of the work that I do, I do get to work with organizations and I do help them build out their strategies. But the one thing, again, that's always within our control is how we show up. What are the conversations we're engaging with? Who are the people that we're engaging with? Who are the networks that we connect ourselves into? Who are the relationships that we're building, that we're fostering? There's some real elements that you can take away today and enact right away versus some of these systemic challenges that there is no easy button. There is no one answer that we can say, do this one thing and we're going to solve it. It's just not the reality. So how do we start to understand the global and also local impact around inclusive hiring? I had the opportunity earlier this year to go to the United Nations for the Commission on the Status of Women, and I reflected a little bit on that experience as I prepared this presentation, because I want us to remember that there are global challenges that still persist. So we know that there are systemic barriers that are continuing to limit women's advancement worldwide, including economic, social, and leadership opportunities. And so while we're trying to talk specifically around inclusive hiring, there are these systemic barriers that are also weighing in on creating these challenges. So if we don't see women of color represented in certain roles, our unconscious biases are going to come in, and we may also hold ideals of that a working parent or a working mother is not an ideal candidate for a position. So we're still bumping up against a workplace that was sort of formulated in the 1960s of, someone's at home taking care of the kids, someone shows up to the workplace at 8 a.m. or whatever the time is, and they work the whole day and they go home and everything's taken care of. We know that's not the reality for a lot of families now, but we haven't addressed sort of the systemic workplace barriers that have been created through that system. In terms of global landscape as well, we have economic disparities, unequal pay, limited leadership representation, and restricted access to resources remain a significant hurdle as well. So we know that women are often in lower paying positions, and so again, the sort of connection to their their upwarding potential is still limited because they aren't being able to access some of those higher paying positions. And for those that are accessing those, it does come down to the relationships that they've built, the networks that they have had access to understand about those positions. We also see in the global landscape intersectional inequalities. So women, particularly, women of color, immigrants, and those in marginalized communities face compounding barriers. So I don't have to convince everyone in this room of that. We know that, but it's a constant reminder that we have to bring into the forefront to understand that the simplicity that our brain applies to issues is not going to solve these complex solutions. So we have to come at it from multiple different angles to understand how can we sort of unravel those systems that have been built up for, in some cases, a really long time. In cultural norms is the last piece here, and the policies often reinforce those gendered roles, right, and limiting career progression and leadership potential. When I hear a story of someone saying that they heard, someone wasn't considered for a position because they were of childbearing years, I sink in my chair or slouch a little bit hearing that. Part of me is like, yeah, that's the challenge that we are still faced. And I think for some people, they think, oh, that we're beyond that. We're unfortunately not beyond it. So bringing this to the forefront into workplaces to say, like, how can we understand the specific challenges of individuals inside of organizations and taking that information and then sort of building strategies to actually address those challenges. So the other part that I wanted to sort of share with you as well is around, what we're sort of hearing in the space of DEI. I'm a pretty optimistic person. I do fundamentally believe this work is so important to making our world a better place, so we can connect across differences, so we can, rather than seeing separation, seeing communities grow stronger and better. But we are facing some, other challenges in terms of, do we need to continue to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work? Companies are questioning whether or not they actually include all elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maybe they remove the D, maybe they review the E. People are getting very sensitive around this topic. And so I share this because it's going to be a potential challenge as we look to some of these issues. And what we really need to focus in on are what are the outcomes? What are the outcomes that we want? And we want to attract the best talent. We want to bring the best individuals into the organization. The research says that if we're bringing in a woman of color, if we're bringing in someone who is a parent, they are actually so focused on doing a good job in the workplace. Like, their output is higher than maybe the average employees. And so those are actually the workers that we want to attract into organizations. So how can we have those conversations? If we want our bottom line to grow, if we want to, reach more communities, whatever the end goal is for an organization, you can do that better by attracting the best talent, and you're leaving people out with your current policies. And so I wonder a little bit about changing our language when we have these conversations to have a more direct entry point on what the solution is, rather than maybe getting lost in some of the politics that are now starting to show up when we use the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if we're ever concerned about, what those key metrics are, I wanted to share 3 with you. 19%, organizations have 19% higher revenue from innovation when they have diverse and inclusive teams. 76% of job seekers prioritize diversity when choosing an employer. And so are going to have people asking you those questions. Tell me more about what you're doing in this space. And 5.4 times higher employee retention rate. So you're actually going to start to see less cost related to going out to the job market to seek new talent because you're able to retain those individuals in your organization. So there's, if people speak the language of numbers, there are many metrics that are important to recognize in this space as well. So my question for all of you to start to think about is, how can we align hiring practices with global inclusion goals? If we want to make the world a better place, we want to attract that best talent, how can we align our hiring practices to really thinking about tapping into different talent streams that we maybe haven't thought about before? What changes can your organization make to foster equity, and how can we ensure women and marginalized groups thrive in leadership? So not only sort of the attraction into an organization, but what does promotion look like? What do mentorship opportunities look like? And I don't believe they always have to be a formalized program inside of an organization, but it could be skills through education that you're teaching to your existing leaders to help mentor those on their team. How are they starting to think about those individuals and how they can achieve their highest potential inside of the organization? So let's get into some of the common challenges and barriers around crafting inclusive job description. So what does the research tell us? We have outdated processes. Recruitment systems often rely on legacy practices that were never designed with inclusion in mind. These include rigid qualifications, requirements for standard evaluations that fail to consider diverse experiences. Traditional job postings often use cookie-cutter templates that overlook inclusive language or even evolving job expectations. If you go onto LinkedIn, if you go onto Indeed, whatever job site, and start to look at what these job descriptions, they are so lengthy in terms of what their requirements are, what they're asking for, and it adds a layer of complexity that doesn't necessarily need to be there, especially when we think about how our world is changing from a technology perspective. And so really thinking about how can we start to bring inclusion into these areas. And I've seen organizations actually look for different mediums for applications, even submitting a video, if that feels more comfortable to you to share who you are. Because really at the end of the day, what's your differentiation if you have, I hate to do this because we often say, oh, well, if we have two candidates and if one has this and one has this, what would you choose? Well, that's never the reality of what we're dealing with. But if someone is able to convey who they are and what they're passionate about and what they're going to bring to your organization through a video versus trying to convey that through a cover letter, maybe there's this personal connection that we can start to make sooner within the actual process. We also know within the research of what's not working is that there's embedded biases. And so unconscious biases are going to seep into hiring decisions at every single stage, whether it's in the job descriptions and maybe the language that we're using. We can think about resume screening. If we have to go through many resumes, we may rely on past systems and thinking patterns to make those decisions. And then think about interviews and the biases that can perpetuate inequity often without us realizing it. I'm trying to remember the stat that was shared with us yesterday, but just sort of how quickly a first impression is made, and it's around how we present ourselves. And while part of me hates that, because the question that was asked yesterday was like, what did everyone think about when they started their day in terms of how they were going to present themselves? And I already shared with you, my child was sick yesterday. So what I thought about was how my comfortable black pants that were very, had a drawstring, I could dress those up to come to the conference and that no one would really say anything, which no one did, so thank you. But that's the reality of the world that we live in, right? It is around first impressions and how we're interacting with one another. And so someone's unconscious bias might come into play in that process. It doesn't mean it's right, but it's something that we need to be aware of. And training is also something that can help to support understanding when we think about what we do on a day-to-day basis and when it's impacting someone else, how can we pull ourselves out of our common practice and maybe pause and think about, okay, how can I make a better informed decision, especially again when it's impacting someone else? Back to what else we see in terms of specific barriers around inclusive hiring. We also see limited access, so sourcing strategies often rely on the same traditional networks, which limit the diversity of candidates who even hear about opportunities. I'll pause on this one and say we have to do a better job of understanding organizations like GROW and other grassroots organizations that are doing really amazing things in the community that may not come originally through your Google searches, that may not necessarily come to the top of your list, but it is so important for us to start to make connections with those community groups. Back to the dialogue with the United Nations, that was one of the pieces that they left us with about how we need to do a better job of supporting grassroots initiatives. And really, they're, my sort of overused language, they're the ones on the front lines. They're the ones that are actually in the communities. They're the ones that are actually having these conversations about the day-to-day barriers that marginalized individuals are facing. And so if big organizations can connect with those organizations, maybe we can do a better job of eliminating some of those barriers, because we, again, keep relying on traditional methods for our recruitment. And listen, we know it's not working. We know we're getting the feedback that says there's a lot of candidates who are willing and ready to do the work, but they aren't actually getting through that recruitment process. And so we've got to interrupt it in some way. So I think just making the specific plug, I guess, around like really figuring out some new sourcing strategies within your organization. Overlooked potential is another one, and focusing on traditional qualifications such as specific degrees or years of experience. We can overlook candidates with transferable skills or non-linear career paths. If you ask anyone about their career path, it is absolutely not linear. There have been ebbs and flows and ups and downs in whatever direction you want to talk about. And so we've got to stop thinking that that's what we are looking for in terms of recruitment. I think years of service is also something that I bumped up. Again, I worked in the engineering world for a number of years, and that was like sort of a little bit of a badge of honor. Like, I've got 20 years experience of doing this. And I always ask the question, well, what if someone had 15 years of experience or 10 years of experience with someone who could mentor them? Would that not then also solve the challenge of the position that you're trying to fill? And so again, we've got to start thinking a little bit differently and looking at potential. On the other side of this, research tells us that women are often hired based on proving themselves, or men are hired on their potential. So we are also dealing with that unconscious bias. Hopefully it's unconscious and not conscious. But either way, there's still these sort of systemic challenges that remain. A couple last ones here around retention gaps. Hiring for diversity is only part of the equation. Without systemic supports and clear pathways for advancement, organizations struggle to retain diverse talent, leading to tokenism or high turnover. So once we've made the hiring decision, once we've addressed what our actual pipeline process is, we have to think about what is the environment in which employees are working in and what are the supports that they need to do their best work. And this can be a multitude of ways of doing that. A real common mechanism right now is through employee resource groups. A lot of larger organizations have groups that come together to really support individuals and understand what their experiences are, and then that information can feed back into the organization to say, this is what we need to look at. So I want us always to remember it's not just about getting people through the door, but it's also about how are we keeping them. Okay, I have to be really fast. So all of that to say, we also have barriers specifically for women and diverse candidates. So again, unintended bias is going to come up, gendered language still comes up within job postings, limited reach in terms of the networks that we're going to, an overemphasis on past credentials instead of prioritizing future potential within candidates. If we're going to take a risk inside of our organization, is it really that big of a risk to take a chance on a different candidate than maybe we traditionally have versus some of the other financial risks that organizations take on? So that's another piece that I don't actually see it as a huge risk. If you have the right supports in place to help someone be successful, you're actually adding in a different perspective, a different point of view, a different lived experience that we know brings us to a greater place of innovation and creativity. So the last thing I want to say around some of these challenges that I was starting to think about too is we are really at a crossroads when it comes to AI and how much it's being integrated into either our organizations. I know there's a lot of risk considerations, but people are using AI on a day-to-day basis. And so this has the power to transform recruitment when we think about a process that really hasn't been interrupted in, I don't know, the entire time I've been in the workforce. You submit your cover letter, you submit your resume, and that's what it is. But we have to also think about the risk of amplifying biases within these processes as well. So bad data in, bad data out. So we have to really think about how we're using and building truly inclusive systems. So where do we go from here? How do we start to think about how your organizations can address these challenges? And what are the steps to truly building an inclusive hiring process? So I'll go through these kind of quickly, and certainly take pictures. If you want the slides, you can email me. I'm happy to share them with you. But we have to promote inclusion as a strategic advantage. This is, again, the core to the work that I do. How are we getting to that place of making inclusive environments where everyone can show up and really achieve their highest potential? If necessary, communicate the business case for diversity and highlight the links between inclusive hiring and financial improvement. Align your hiring practices align your hiring practices with business objectives. This for me is also so key. If whatever you are focused on inside your organization, you can bring a lens of inclusion to that. So I think about an organization that's saying, oh, we're going to grow significantly in 2025. We're going to need to bring talent into our organization. Amazing. As you think about what that strategy is to achieve that outcome, what are the different agencies that you're going to go work with? What are the different community groups you're going to go have conversations with? How are you thinking about that recruitment process in a different way and aligning it to an outcome of we want to bring in the best talent as we grow our business? Set the standard for leadership commitment. This is always so important to see and within our organization that those tone from the top and those in leadership positions also need to be seen making purposeful decisions around inclusion. Now, the cost of not doing anything is maybe another angle that we can start to think about as we think about inclusion and hiring. We are having missed opportunities if we don't think about this and limiting access to diverse perspectives, stifling innovation inside of organizations. We know that homogenous teams are less adaptable to market changes. If we have a group of people that think the same, have the same ideas, we're not going to get to those creative outcomes. So how can we bring those different individuals into our organization, or maybe they're already there, and how are we tapping them on the shoulder to help bring them into the conversations that matter? Turnover costs, I sort of mentioned this earlier, but we actually know through data that the average cost of replacing an employee is 50 to 200% of their salary. So when we're exiting someone, making our decision on what the new dynamics are within the organization, at some point we're going to be bringing people back in, sort of the ebbs and flows of the business community. And so if you don't have to have that replacement cost, those are dollars that you can keep within the organization to continue to grow and do the work that you want to do. And I think the last one here around reputation risk is actually an important one as well, because there is a social component for many job seekers. We saw the statistic earlier, 76% of them are looking to organizations that are supporting these outcomes. And so if you start to not pay attention to this, you are not going to be attracting the best talent. People are not going to want to work there. So remember that language always matters through all of this. And so when we are building our job descriptions, candidates are going to look for cultural cues in there that are going to align to their values. And also think about, like, again, there's tools that you can use that's referenced here. Textio is one of them. But there's tools that you can use to really look at those job descriptions and say, how can I make these as inclusive as possible? How can I remove language that's potentially going to detract someone from applying to our organization? And make sure you're not using jargon or overly complex terms. Be as specific as possible about what the work is so someone can see themselves in that job posting. And certainly there's some examples there around gendered language as well. Overcoming resistance to change. You may need to arm yourself with some of this language as well. I have an example of being in an organization. It took me 1 year to change the hiring policy to allow all jobs to be posted for a minimum of 3 days, because the business wanted to be able to put people into positions as soon as possible. They felt that they already knew who the best potential candidate was. So we're not even putting job postings out for people to even have a chance of applying. And so we've got to tell them the benefits of having these processes done in a better way, because you are going to have a better candidate pool. I'm going as fast as possible. Defining and measuring success. In a business world, this is another piece of language that's highly used, and so start to track your data. Start to understand what's the diversity of your candidate pool. What are the retention rates of diverse hires? What's the reputation or the representation and leadership? And what's the feedback from your new hires as well? If we don't have the data, we aren't able to make informed decisions. And so you can start at the minimum. I know you all have data around the men and women inside your organization. At least tell that story. And then there can be a body of work to start to collect additional data around visible minorities, persons with disabilities, and Indigenous peoples. Those are classified groups within Canada, and so organizations that are federally regulated already have to collect that data, so it's not an extreme ask, it's one that within the realm of reason. And maybe to the question that was asked earlier, just really quickly, if an organization is publicly traded, they have to disclose the gender makeup of their board, and they are able to they can make the decision of whether or not they share data related to those other designated groups. So there's starting to be a whisper of accountability around what does representation look like, at least at the boardroom table. And so as this starts to filter down into organizations, we'll start to have a bit more data and understanding of who's in the organization, who's being promoted, who's being given these opportunities, and where the gaps still might be. Okay, I'll go to this next slide. And this was a little bit of a hiring checklist. for you to start to go through in terms of reviewing the job description, how do you reach the broadest candidate pool? So inside your organization, you can start to create this. How can we interrupt the current process that we have and start to catch ourselves in moments where we might be leaving candidates behind? For my job seekers in the room, research the organization, review the job descriptions critically, highlight your transferable skills. It doesn't have to be credential-based. I worked at this organization. It can be your involvement in community, and I would argue those pieces on a resume actually make you an ideal candidate and will differentiate you from others who are also applying. Evaluate the interview process so that the question was asked earlier. Ask things like, how does the organization support employment growth through diverse identities? What is your commitment to fostering an inclusive workplace? Gauge whether the interviewer welcomes and encourages such discussions. They don't have to have the world's problems solved within their responses, but you can tell by the way in which they respond to questions like that if they're actually giving consideration to this work. Communicate your expectations. I think we now live in a world where you can absolutely do that and say, so then you can match yourself to the organizations that is going to support your needs. And it shouldn't be last on the list because I think it's the most important thing. Leverage your network. I've heard the quote, your network is your net worth. Absolutely. I use LinkedIn fairly regularly, so if you want to connect with me, please do. I am the biggest supporter of connecting people, whatever your passion is, whatever your interests are. And I think you never know. The tagline in my business, creating a more inclusive world, one conversation at a time. You never know where that conversation might take you and the connections that you might make from it. So please stay true to your unique strengths, and I know I've sort of run out of time, so please reflect on who those individuals are within your network that you can connect to. Reflect on your own biases, stay curious, ask questions, embrace discomfort, because if we keep doing things the way that we've always done them, we will get the same outcomes. If you're looking for more resources in the diversity and inclusion space, there's lots on my website, and there's my QR code to link to all those resources. So thanks for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Erin. So, do apologize. We will be entertaining questions after the minister. Thank you so much once again. Let's give a big hand for our speaker today, Erin Davis. Thank you so much, Erin. And of course, again, thank you so much for your inspiring and insightful presentation today. We appreciate the time and effort you put into this session, and we're excited to implement these strategies in our own work to drive meaningful change. And again, your passion and expertise are truly motivating, and we're grateful for your guidance. Once again, let's give a big hand for Erin Davis. Thank you so much. And now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce today's keynote speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big hand for Honorable Tanya Fair, MLA from the Minister of Arts, Culture, and Status of Women.
Oh my goodness, I'm looking at that headshot. It's time for a new headshot. That was from like 6 or 7 years ago, before I went into politics, when I was still young and innocent, before politics destroyed me. So it's adorable. But anyways, hello everyone, and thank you for having me. And I really enjoyed catching the last part of Erin's presentation. Before I went into politics, I spent my career in human resources. So it was interesting to hear some of what she was saying, and I'm sure you've done lots of incredible work beyond what I just heard, but good for you for having that change made in your company, where you said you got internal postings posted internally for at least 3 days. The number of times when I was in HR, have to have that conversation with managers of, you may know who you want, and that may be the person you end up picking, but you don't know who might want to apply it. You don't know what you don't know, and you don't know unless you post it. So enjoyed hearing that, and I love the stay curious, ask questions. I asked too many questions my whole life used to drive my mother nuts, but you got to ask questions, right? You can't just keep doing things the way they've been done. So anyways, really enjoyed hearing the last part of your presentation. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here among all these amazing people, and I would like to thank Tracy and her team and the rest of the Grow Women leaders for your dedication to organize this event. As Alberta's Minister of Arts, Culture and Status of Women, I feel really fortunate to be here, so thank you for having me. I applaud all of you for continuing to ensure your workplaces are more diverse and inclusive places for everyone, but particularly women. Alberta's government recognizes the crucial contribution of women in shaping Alberta's story. We know that when women participate in the economy, everyone benefits. We know, as an example, that as a province we are facing challenges having enough skilled people to drive continued growth, and we know women must be part of the solution to meet that demand. For example, a recent Canada Industry Council report put a price tag on women's participation, showing that advancing gender equality in work could add up to $150 billion to Canada's GDP. So that's why our government is working hard to advance gender equality at work and in all aspects of women's lives. We're stepping up to support women's economic participation and empowering women to take leadership roles as we continue to grow our economy. Although Alberta has often led the charge on increasing women's equality in the workplace, we know there's still a lot of work to be done. That means ensuring women have access to good quality jobs and equal opportunities without any additional barriers holding them back. And to quote Carol Moen from Women Building Futures, it means that we're not just focused on getting women ready for more jobs, it also means making sure all sectors are ready to support women. Alberta has a long tradition of women breaking barriers for other women in the workplace. Historically, women in Alberta have earned more per week than other Canadian women. In fact, data shows that Alberta has always been among the top 2 provinces in Canada for weekly wages for women. Alberta is where Canada saw its first woman police officer and first woman magistrate. It was the birthplace of Rosella Bjornsson, the first female pilot for a commercial airline in North America, and home of Violet King, the first Black woman to become a lawyer in Canada and the first Black person to graduate law in Alberta. Women in this province have always been innovators and leading the way to breaking down barriers, and they continue to make strides. For example, recent data from the Alberta Securities Commission shows 84% of companies have 1 or more women on their board, compared with 46% in 2015. Alberta's largest companies are attracting the many qualified, talented, and experienced women we have in this province to serve on their boards. Of Alberta-based companies with an over $10 billion market value, women hold 35% of board positions. This is progress, but also a reminder that we still have a lot of work to do to reach equal representation at all tables. Today, it is the women and employers in this room who are creating new paths for women and all people in Alberta to follow in the future. We know bringing diverse ideas to the table leads to better bottom lines and outcomes for all Albertans. Your work is pushing our workplaces and by extension our economy and province forward, and we want to help you make the important strides yet to be made. That's why we're investing in programs like the Women in STEM Scholarship, the Persons Case Scholarship, and our new Women in Technical and Applied Arts Scholarship. These scholarships allow more women to pursue fulfilling, high-paying careers. And it's why we're partnering with organizations that support the development of women in Alberta's workforce. This includes helping them reach new heights in careers in aviation, with $5 million to elevate aviation last year for underrepresented groups. And recently, Alberta's government made a $2.8 million investment to Women Building Futures to help more women train for jobs as professional drivers in the commercial trucking industry, as just one example of a field that needs more skilled workers. To improve access to opportunities, we have also developed an online directory tailored to women. Our Women's Hub is an online portal that helps women easily find resources offered by the provincial government, including resources for advancing their education and careers. We also know that there are other social and societal barriers for women, such as the importance of access to affordable childcare for women raising families. I heard this clearly at a roundtable with women business leaders earlier this year, where I was fortunate to have many women leaders join me to discuss what else we need to do collectively to support Alberta women. We know childcare is an issue that crosses all industries and positions, and one that impacts all parents, men and women. Lacking affordable quality childcare is a barrier to working for many women who want to work part-time or work shift work and to hold positions with more responsibility. That means it's also a barrier to families. So through the Early Learning and Childhood Agreement, our government is creating an accessible, high quality and inclusive childcare system. A system that is adding thousands of new spaces while also supporting jobs for early childhood educators. This benefit is twofold because when we create opportunities for child care workers, we are supporting women with families to have equal opportunity to access career opportunities, and we are also creating opportunities within the child care sector, which are often filled by women. At roundtables and stakeholder meetings, I have also heard other barriers women are facing in employment and entrepreneurship. We know we need to support more training. We need to make sure work sites are safe and comfortable for women. Educate young girls early so they know the vast opportunities available to them. Reach out to women who may be new to the province to help them break barriers that may be unique to them. Celebrate our role models. And within my own Ministry of Arts and Culture, we need to support women in our cultural industries. The list goes on, and I will continue to advocate for women to my government colleagues and look for opportunities where we can address these barriers. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on is, in addition to the programs that we have, I know that as a minister, I only can know what we can do to help women and help people in the province if we hear from them directly. And that's why it's so important for me to continue to have the roundtables and engage in events like this so that we hear firsthand what you're experiencing. And so I want to close by recognizing the extraordinary recipients that are going to be honored as part of the Best Workplace for Diverse Women Awards. I want to thank you for championing leadership, diversity, mentorship, and sponsorship programs, work-life balance, and so much more. Your efforts to address barriers in the workplace are making an impact on not just women in your organization, but the broader workplace and community too. So my congratulations to all of you for being here, for all the work you do. My thanks for your contributions that continue to make Alberta the best place to live, work, and raise a family. So thank you for having me. I wish I could stay here all day. I was talking with Justin, my Chief of Staff, some burning issues back at the legislature. I have to head right back, but trust me, I'd rather be spending the day with you all. But thank you so much for having me, and I hope you find the day really fulfilling and rewarding. So thank you kindly.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Tanya Fur. Thank you so much. And of course, on behalf of all of us here today, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Honorable Tanya Fur for delivering such an insightful and inspiring keynote address. Thank you for being here and for sharing your valuable insights. Your contribution has made this event truly memorable, and we look forward to carrying the lessons learned into our own work and life. Once again, let us all give a big round of applause to Honorable Tanya Fur. Thank you so much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let us proceed to the questions. All right, now I would like to call in again Erin Davis to please entertain the questions that our audience have for her. All right, this time, can you raise your hand? Okay, we have a question. Okay.
Hi, Erin.
Hi.
One of the questions I have, and it comes often to us, is about the cultural fit. I think we always talk about not hiring for the fit, but how can you answer that to somebody that says, well, it does matter because it matters to me that my team feels that there's I don't know, a good work environment. So how can I have those conversations with when I talk to managers to say, don't hire for the fit, hire for inclusive and diversity environment. So what is your perspective?
Really great question. I have a couple thoughts. The first one is I try to shift my language from cultural fit to cultural add. So as we think about the dynamics in the workplace and the example I sort of used earlier, if we're going to get to innovative solutions, if we have people who in the room who have the same degree, have the same work experience, who have the same whatever examples you want to use, then are we really going to get to a place where we get creativity and come up with different solutions? We need to work in a way of bringing different ideas, different perspectives. So trying to use that as an example and a springboard to then saying, well, that's why we want to bring in someone who's going to be culturally additive to our team dynamics, who can bring us a different perspective, who can bring us a different idea. I think about how many times we overuse the term collaboration inside of organizations. Well, we've got to collaborate with this other team. We've got to bring in different ideas, different perspectives. It's the same thing when we think about our own team dynamics. And I would also challenge them on the risk piece that I talked about. Like, it seems like the least risky thing to do to bring in someone who has different ideas and different perspectives.
Thank you.
You're
That's
welcome.
brilliant.
There we have it, our first question for Erin. Is there someone who has a question? Second question? All right, we have here Letitia Bird.
Hi, Erin. Hi. This is something we've been talking about a lot in the States, and I'm wondering if it's relevant here in Canada, but with the way that DEI has been just under a heavy, lens of scrutiny, organizations are nervous or to publish or even, put out there that they have what they call diversity quotas, right? Do you have any guidance on how to respond to organizations that say that they should not invest in inclusive recruiting because of quote unquote diversity quotas and the legal implications that could, come from that?
Yeah, so it will be a bit different in Canada than it is in the US, and I give that sort of caveat that we aren't dealing with potential legal ramifications, which does boost the risk, right? You're gonna have your board potentially coming forward and saying, like, we can't take that risk on because of legislative changes. So that becomes a little bit more tricky. What I was talking about earlier is how can we shift our language to speaking about the outcomes rather than maybe focusing on the language of DEI, right? And so we want the best talent. We want the best people inside of our organizations, the best skill sets inside the organization. And how are we going to do that? Well, we've got to go to different talent pools. We've got to go to different institutions. We've got to work with grassroots organizations. So part of me is sad that it's a little bit of like an iteration of removing some of that DEI language from how I talk about it. But at the end of the day, I didn't share this earlier, I've come from a background of strategy, and so sometimes we have to be really strategic about the outcomes that we want to get to, and so I think it's understanding the language of those that we're speaking with, what's going to resonate most with them, and from that moving forward to say this continues to need to be the outcomes that we have to look at. And when we look across like the labor force, there are so many industries that are looking at labor shortages, and so if we start to address that and say we need to upskill talent to fill these positions so we can execute on the work that's ahead of us, we've got to look at recruitment in a different way. The way that we've traditionally done it isn't going to yield us the talent that we need for the future. So yeah, I really do think we have to start to evolve our language a little bit more. Be smarter than the people who think that removing DEI from the conversation is going to eliminate it completely. It's still going to be there.
All right, thank you so much. Any other questions? Can you raise your hand so I can come to you? Running? Any questions?
Thank you, Erin. I really enjoyed your presentation. I do follow you on LinkedIn, so yeah, good to hear from you. I do have a question out of curiosity. So I'm just curious about your perspective on quota for women. Like, for example, there are organizations who are trying to correct sort of the disparity in terms of women in leadership through, quotas on boards or in senior leadership positions, and there are divergent views on that, including women who are opposed to that. So I'm just curious what your take on that is.
So I'll give you my short and my long answer. My short answer is yes, we need to have, I will use the language of target because I think people can wrap their heads around that a little bit more in terms of even how boards talk about what are our financial targets for our organization, how are we going to get there. So if there is a gap in our organization, if we want to do better, we need to measure it. So I am supportive of quotas, of targets. The long answer though is we have to be in a place to understand how we're going to move towards that, achieving that. So if we haven't done we haven't laid the foundation of understanding around getting to that place and achieving gender parity, we're gonna be constantly facing a battle of maybe not making the most informed decision and putting people into positions that maybe they may not be successful in. Now, on the other hand, if we put people into roles, we have to set them up for success. So that's going to be something else that we have to think about. But I do think what gets measured gets done, and we hear that all the time. And so we need to put the strategies in place to get to a place of saying these are what we want the outcomes to be. And I'll give a quick example. So people might be familiar with Enbridge. They are a local employer here in Edmonton and actually North America. And so they did a lot of work at their board level and within the organization. So they had a diversity dashboard. Version 1.0 included just gender-based data of men and women to show representation across different departments and leadership levels. So it was really a full spectrum picture of where people were located, what positions they held. Over time, they got more sophisticated and started to collect better data. So they got information within those 4 designated groups that I mentioned before. So they had visible minorities, persons with disabilities, and Indigenous persons, and again, across the organization and by leadership level. And as they did that work and as they brought that awareness into the organization, they were also doing it at the boardroom table. And if you go look at their website, it is a very diverse board dynamic. So no longer can we say, oh, those women don't exist. Those people aren't out in the workforce. They're there, they're available, and we've got to do the work to create that pipeline. So they're usually the case study that I share that it is possible to start to set, and they did have targets that they set internally.
Thank you so much. One last question. Any hand? No more questions? All right, I guess that's it for today. Erin, thank you so much. Once again, let's give a big hand for Erin Davis. Thank you so much. All right, but of course, ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to our refreshments and networking, I would like to call in one of the Grow Women Leaders member to explain to us and to give additional information about the workshop that we will be doing later. Ladies and gentlemen, this time we would like to request Ziba Karimi.
Hello everyone and thank you. My name is Zeba Karimi, as she said, and today I will be explaining a little bit about the workshop which was part of the summit yesterday. Those who were here and put their inputs already, we thank them. And for those who are new today or those who didn't have time to participate in the workshop, the breakout sessions yesterday, just a little bit of brief explanation of why we're having these papers on the wall and what is the purpose and what we want, what the inputs we expect from you. So the workshop was about these four main barriers that we think they exist in all the organizations and gender bias, unequal access to network, and lack of mentorship and discrimination in hiring practices. So for these main four barriers, we are expecting to collect some feedback from you, and the questions are taken there, and also for the solution part, the full question is there. I will just explain a little bit about one barrier, and then for the rest you can read there. For example, for the discrimination in hiring practices is one of the barrier. We want to know how does this barrier manifest in the workforce or in the workplace. How does it happen? In which aspects? In which aspects it affect women and minorities and other people in the workforce? For example, in recruitment, how does it happen? Have you seen any examples, any incident it happening? We need your inputs in real life examples. In recruitment, in promotion, in compensation, in all other aspects, if you have noticed, just we need your examples and your inputs if you have noticed anything. Then what are the root causes of this? Why do you think they happen? And what caused them? So that these discrimination or these barriers exist in there. And what is its impact on the economic potential? By the economic potential, we mean the ability of that specific company and also the community, the city, the province, the country as a whole. How does it affect the ability of all these to have promotion in economy? So because of this barrier, they cannot promote well. Then coming to the solution part, for example, for the solution, we need to know what immediate actions we can take, you think. The organizations can take, the people can take, the HR, the managers can take to address these barriers, like in short term. What immediate actions can be taken? That's the first question. For the second question, do you think these actions that you think we have to take to solve this barrier, are these gonna be implementable? How can we implement it? If yes, if possible, how to implement them? If not possible to implement, there is a solution, you know this is the solution, but if you cannot implement it, what are the challenges you think that they cannot be implemented? So even we know we need those challenges that you assume they exist in there. And the last question is, for those challenges to overcome, what resources are needed? What the organizations need, what the people need, what the managers need, and what the general public need to do to overcome those challenges that exist. The solution is there, but it's not implementable. The second one is, why not implementable? There's challenges. What are the challenges? The last one is what to do. What resources are needed? If it's like whatever resources, human resources, economical resources, whatever is needed to overcome. So this is the whole idea of the workshop, that we need your inputs. And for all those four barriers, we have the first the barrier identification questions in there, and then the solution for each of them. So we don't have a specific time for it. You can take the whole day, the break times, the networking time, whatever comes to your mind about these four barriers. You can just write your idea or whatever incident you have experienced, you have noticed, you have heard from someone. You can just write it and stick it to the specific sticker in there on the wall. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ziva, for that very informative information. All right, this time, ladies and gentlemen, of course, we would like to remind everybody, okay, during the break time, you can stick your sticky notes with all the information, with all your ideas on the white papers that we have sticked on the wall. Okay? All right. This time, ladies and gentlemen, of course, we would like to invite you to take a break, enjoy some light refreshments, and network with fellow attendees. Coffee and tea are available just outside for you guys to enjoy, and also for your convenience, the washroom is located right past the photo banner. Feel free to mingle, relax, and make the most of your time. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll be back shortly.